Satchidananda Rupaya Vishwotpatyadi Hetave Tapatraya Vinashaya Shri Krishnaya Vayam Numaha. Janmadhyasya yatonvayaditaratascharteshvabhignaswarat Tene Brahma Hridaya Adi Kavaye Muhyanti Yatsurayaha Tejo Hridam Yatha Vinimayo Yatra Trisargo Mrisha Dhamna Svena Sada Nirastakuhakam Satyam Param Dhimahi Dharma Projita Ketavotra Paramo Nirmatsaranam Satam Vedyam Vastavamatra Vastu Shivadam Tapatrayon Mulanam Srimad Bhagavate Mahamuni Kim va Parerishwaraha Sadyo Hridyavarudyate Trakritibihi Shushrushubi Tatshanat. With your eyes still closed, we invoke toughness and evoke hope. Hari Om and greetings from Niagara Falls. I'm going to read to you what I read last week to bring more clarity. Kalena stana shauchabhyam samskarestapase jaya shuddhyanti dane santushtya dravyanyatmatma vidyaya. This verse is about purity. How does one purify materials? Through kala, or time. How does one purify the body? Through snana, or bathing. How does one purify places? Through shaucha, or cleaning. How does one purify one's actions? Through samskaras, or intention. How does one purify the senses? Through tapa, or discipline. How does one purify karma, or rituals? Through sejaya, which means sacrifice. How does one purify their wealth? Through dana, or charity. How does one purify the mind? Through santushta, which means contentment, or I use the word peace. And most importantly, how does one purify the ego? Atma vidya. By knowing one is not the ego, that one is the spirit. What a lovely verse. And this is very much in the direction of what our course is about. The purer one is, one's ego is, the closer one feels to their creator, to the divine. If I feel very separate, even from my wife, why? Because there's vices between us, between me and her. But if I feel very close to my wife, there's virtues there then, correct? That is purity. One gauge of whether one is becoming purer, closer to the Creator, to Bhagavan. I'll read the English to you. Very powerful. The most conspicuous sign is complete self-dedication to Him and the feeling of intense anguish whenever the mind slips away from Him. You will know that you are flowing through Vedanta and Bhagavata, that whenever your mind is not thinking about Bhagavan, you feel shaken. You feel that anguish. And to try to understand this physically, like your breath. When you're short of breath for whatever reason, you're swimming or you're in a tight space, and how there's so much of frustration and longing for that air, we can relate to that. Can you relate to that same bhava or feeling towards Bhagavan? In the science of devotion, there are two forms of bhakti. There are lots and lots and lots of frameworks. Here's a framework which I've come across, which I'm sharing with you. One is called Vaidhi Bhakti. Vaidhi Bhakti is when you engage in practices because you're supposed to. So many of us grew up like that, correct? Many of you shared in the chat, your relationship with God has always been externalized, yes? Many of the mandirs that I go to, that doesn't change whether you're 2 or 200. The second form of bhakti is called prema bhakti. And this is where you engage in practices first because you want to. And all those who are new to this course, I feel you're engaged in this prema bhakti because you want to. And those who are not new to this course, you don't want to, you need to. Correct? You need to be in this course. Not out of fear of me, though that's partially the reason, but more so, love for the divine. Adding one more detail here is, how do you know whether you're engaged in Vaidhi or Prema Bhakti? When you count. If you count how much of money you're giving, or how much time you're engaged in japa, or you feel enough puja, enough Vedanta and Bhagavata, then you know it's Vaidhi Bhakti. But when you don't count, you feel like there's never enough. That word doesn't come into your system. You know that's Prema Bhakti then. I observe this so openly in our courses. Initially, everyone is so excited. New course, new class, and slowly those numbers come down because they don't want bhakti or jnana. Everyone else was doing it, so I should do it too. I'm not saying that to all of you. You're in class right now. This is really a threat. Make sure you keep being in class or I'm going to point you out. Devaki and Vasudeva. They wanted a child like Bhagavan. And no one is like Bhagavan. So Bhagavan became their child. Devaki and Vasudeva are icons of yajna, which means they're dedicated. I highlighted that about Devaki, that she was ready for her infants to be murdered, for the hope that the 8th infant would survive and be freedom for her and for all. Such a sacrifice none of us can conceive of. This is just a story. Those who have been through the loss of a child, through a miscarriage, not being able to have a child, you can relate to this marginally more. But nothing like what Devaki and Vasudeva have gone through. Bhagwan, he is ever encouraging us to be focused on him. And sometimes he does that in a hard way, sometimes he does that in an easy way. The birth of Bhagwan is encouraging us to engage in tapa. And tapa means to burn down one's comfort zones. Particularly that you think you're this body, this mind, even this intellect. But one who's focused on what's behind the body, the mind, the intellect, that person who's focused on Bhagwan, they start to expand themselves. They don't live just for themselves or their families or their communities. And how will you know you're engaged in tapa? When you practice more titiksha. Titiksha means absorption or endurance. How much Bhagwan Krishna's parents have had to go through, will go through. They were engaged in tapa, which is why their titiksha shakti, they were able to endure so much. As we go through Bhagwan Krishna's life, and you'll get to meet more asuras now, he obviously never gave up. Those around him never gave up. And we are never going to give up. And I did show this to you in Meaningful Mornings, but I want to show it again because I talked about it. One of our Devis had drawn this for me. I don't know, maybe she sensed I was giving up. So she drew this. Can you see how there's that toad that's being eaten by that stork, but that toad still has that arm out to save itself? I was once at a bhiksha in a city I'm not going to tell you about, because then you're all going to judge each other. And at the end of that bhiksha, usually people give dakshina for the work that I'm doing. So in that home, they gave me a bottle of Dove body wash for men. And I was happy by the gesture, but then I thought to myself, maybe this is a sign that I'm not engaged in enough snana. Lots of unique experiences doing this work. Okay, let's get into some asuras. Yes? Everyone's ready for our katha. The verse that I shared with you in terms of purity, because many of you were interested last week and this week, that is from the 10th skanda, the 5th adhyaya, the 4th shloka, 10.5.4. Okay, I referred to that. Now new content. I'm on the 10th adhyaya. Sorry, I'm tired. 10th skanda, 6th adhyaya. And I'm reading the 34th shloka. That's 10.6.34. Dahyamanasya dehasya dhumascha guru saurabaha uttittita krishna nirbhuktaha apadya hata papmanaha. I love these words. Alas, lo, thine. The English is very funny here. Rishi Shuka says to Raja Parikshita, what was ascharya, what was incredible, When Putana was being burned, and she was massive, they had to cut off limb by limb just to transport her outside of the village. And when they were burning her body, and for those who have been to a cremation ground, those who have carried a dead body before, you know that smell. What did this smell like? Sandalwood. Like chandan. Imagine you walk into a mandir, an old mandir in Bharat, and they're burning like 50 incense sticks, right? You breathe it in. It's in your eyes, but it's quite refreshing. Putana's body was emitting this fragrance. Okay, so the lead up to this. When Nanda woke up and saw his most precious son, he was in a festive mood. And so was all of Gokula. What's so lovely about these details is a child in the community was everyone's child. A death in the community was everyone's death. There was so much closeness. And so he was beginning the celebration, and part of this was to go share with Vasudeva that we have a new child in our family. And imagine how sad Vasudeva would have been, because he knows that's his child, correct? And he can't enjoy him, but also happy that he survived. So he goes and shares with him. Now, while Nanda is visiting Vasudeva, remember Kamsa had this meeting with his ministers and said, all shapeshifters go and begin to murder all infants. And so one of these shapeshifters, her name was Putana. And as a shapeshifter, she made herself super attractive. If you can think of comic book movies, most of the times those shapeshifters become attractive, correct? And they seduce someone. She was most beautiful, so beautiful that when she came into the home where Bhagavan Krishna was, Yashoda, Rohini, they were hypnotized by her. They were just looking at everything she's doing, but they couldn't stop herself. They couldn't stop themselves. And she picked up Bhagavan Krishna, and she had applied poison to her nipples, to her breasts. And she thought that this infant would resist that, because sometimes that happens, especially a foreign entity. But Bhagavan Krishna loved it. And he sucked, and he sucked, and he sucked. And she started feeling like she was being depleted. Like someone who, I don't know, is sitting on your stomach or your chest, you just want to get them off. She says, muncha, muncha, which means release me, release me. And think about the Sanskrit word. Don't we want the same? Release me from this bondage. She says it too. Release me, release me. And finally, when Bhagavan Krishna sucks all of the puta from her, he changes her from puta to, she is putana and he makes her puta. When he takes all of that poison from her, he takes all of that negativity from her, her shape-shifting ability goes away, and her true form as a asuri is revealed. And it's horrendous. The details about her hair, her eyes. At one point, she's described as Rudira Anashna, which means one who drinks blood. So in English, that means she's a vampire. And now I just shared with you that they were shocked by this. They had to cut her body up and then burn her. But that fragrance came. Okay, that's the katha. A lot of you know about this. Here's the important point. As we go through all of these asuras, each one of them symbolizes a different vice. Try to note these down. Try to remember these. For those who study the Ivachara, I've already done this for you. but I'm not going to tell you when I did that. That way you have to read all 11 years of e-vicharas to catch up. Puta means pure, and na means not. So Bhagavan Krishna sucked the na out of her and left the puta, the purity. Who does that sound like? Like us, no? We are puta, but we feel the na part. What causes this is avidya. Putana symbolizes avidya. In English, this means incompleteness or forgetfulness. Ignorance is a very strong word. I don't relate to it so much. Incompleteness on account of forgetfulness. So this is putana. I want to read to you a quote that Swami Tejomayananda had shared and I had posted for all of you. If we hear someone talking ill of another, we should put a stop to it right away. If gossip is repeated 10 times, we begin to believe that it is true. Do you agree with that quote? Now think, how many times have you been told you're this body? How many thoughts have you had that you're unhappy? So if gossip works with 10 times, what happens with 10 million times? Strong forgetfulness. Wherever there's a vidya or unhappiness, from that source, all other vices come. That's why after Putana Asura, many more Asuras come, correct? But she's the first. How deeply symbolic that is. For one who's happy, are they angry? No. Are they disorganized? No. Do they complain? No. So how can we be Bhagavan Krishna to take away the na and leave the puta? Like Bhagavan Krishna held on to her tightly. She said muncha, he said no way. Hold on to divine kata. Kata here means teachings. Hold on to these divine teachings. On Sunday mornings, on Tuesday nights, while you wash the dishes. And if you're holding on to these divine teachings, naturally that means you're letting go of that which is not divine, yes? And to summarize that before we meet one more asura. When we reduce the reality of the relative, we naturally increase the reality of the absolute. If you try to observe just the last month, we began Vedanta and Bhagavata on September 13th. It's astounding. Vyasa's been using the term, oh my gosh, lately. For such small, oh my gosh, the leaf fell. Oh my gosh, there's a rock over there. It's astounding how relative our experiences are, but no one ever feels they're relative, correct? We don't assign the relative value, we assign it absolute value. Na, enough. One more asura. Interested? We have lots of asuras to meet. First, see, their names are, I'll tell you, Charu, Sanjeev, Kalpesh, Subhash, Akila. But we'll go back to the more traditional ones. The 10th skanda, the 7th adhyaya, the 11th shloka. 10, 7, 11. Rudantam sutamadaya Yashoda graha shankita Kritasvastyayanam vipraihi Suktaistanma payayat. There was a loud crash. And again, this is Rishi Shuka sharing with Raja Parikshita. There was a loud crash. And when they came to where that crash was, they saw Bhagavan Krishna, this infant, just giggling and kicking his legs while there was so much destruction around him. And Devi Yashoda thought that her child was possessed. Possessed, and here in the negative, not in the positive, was possessed, and that's why he has these supernatural abilities. He killed Putana. Now there's so much destruction here. So she called these brahmanas and said, chant. Don't we do the same thing? Guruji, bless him. Hit him in the head. Give him an apple. Make him better. So this has been happening for a long time. So this is what Yashoda said. Here are the details leading up to this. When Bhagavan Krishna was 3 months old, they celebrated the 6th samskara. It's called Nishkramana. Many of you who live locally, you came to Vyasa's and Shuka's Nishkramana. We did this when they were 4 months old. In Bhagavan Krishna's case, it was 3 months old. And this is the day where the infant comes out of the house for the first time. And usually they're taken to the mandir or to the ashram. In the details in Bhagavatam, they're celebrating Bhagavan's 3rd birthday. See how obsessed parents are. But theirs is rightfully so. It's called bhakti. Ours is called attachment. So they're celebrating Bhagavan Krishna's birthday, and lots came and gave gifts to him. Ghee and pots and pans. And they put all of this in a shakata. What does shakata mean? A cart. A cart, okay? Putana asura, shakata asura. This is your second. Shakata means cart, but really, this cart was a shape-shifting form of another asura, whose name was Shakata asura. And what this Rakshasa was doing, even though there was stuff on the cart, he was weakening the cart. So what would have happened to all of those materials? It would have come crashing down on Bhagavan Krishna. So what did he do? He busted that asura up. He kicked that asura up, and that cart was totally destroyed. And all the stuff was too. And that's where everyone came running. And wouldn't you be frightened? If you're living such a quiet life and all of a sudden there's an infant in your community and Putana comes, Shakta Asura comes, you may feel that this being is possessed too. Now briefly, and there's not more details than this. In Balavihara plays and comic books, this is all elaborated. We need to focus on the Vedanta. This Asura, Shakata Asura, is symbolic for materialism. Materialism. Please listen carefully, because this is a very apt teaching. When you have, yet do not need for completion materials, then that's just materials. Okay? Let me say that again. When your relationship is you have materials, but you don't need them for completion, then that's materials. When you have, or even don't have, but you need that for completion, that's called materialism. See the difference? It's not about having or not having, it's about needing for completion. Everyone caught that? The difference between materials and materialism. Vedanta is not anti-materials. Vedanta is anti-materialism. When we were sitting with Swami Tejomayananda and Chinmaya Vibhuti, some of you were there, and I had shared with them that our community is taking up the sankalpa to offer $100,000 in dakshina to Guruji over 2 years. He was surprised by that, and he looked at all of the people that were there and says, being with Vivek is expensive. But this is what I'm trying to do, is to shift us from materialism to materials, I'm not putting that money into my haircut. I don't even own a comb. This is a towel that does that. Let me elaborate some. You see, the visualization is all of these materials were on top of Bhagavan Krishna. That's materialism. When it should be the reverse, that Bhagavan should be on top of the materials. That relationship is healthy. We have a fine tradition in Sanatana Dharma that before you live in a house, you first install Bhagavan. That way it's clear to you that this is Bhagavan's home and you're a guest in that home. See how we dilute that? Most people's mandirs are where their cereal boxes are kept too, correct? In our home, forget about our home, my workspaces, I have designated areas where only my sacred books go, like Bhagavatam, etc. No wallets, no keys. I don't let the kids put their toys there. If Sheila by accident tries to put something there, I stare at her for a long time until she figures out that that shouldn't have gone there. Because there's a place for the sacred first. Who cares what happens to the secular? Granola bar there, chapstick there, pens over there. What difference does it make? Yes? Then one is not subject to this Shakatasura. Okay, let me add one more detail and then we'll debrief. How do you know if you're materialistic? The gauge for that is you tend to be fearful and frustrated. Fearful and frustrated. More seriously, your personality type is that who is always afraid and angry. Wherever there's raga, or attachment, or dependence, what comes with that? Bhaya, or fear. Fear that what I'm attached to is going to go away, but any thinking person knows every material came into your life, which means it's going to leave your life. That fear is not justified. And when it does leave, what does fear devolve into? Krodha, or frustration, anger, on what caused that to happen, isn't it? Suppose you have a valuable mug, a snow globe, a dish, and someone by accident drops it. By accident, and we are still frustrated with it. Why? They were the cause for that dependency to break. That was going to break anyways. You should thank that person. They did it for you. And so here's your practice, okay? 2 practices. Whatever is yours, use. Imagine yours is spelt as U-R-S, okay? Like texting yours. Whatever is yours, use. Everything you have right now, use it to the end. Cereal, all of that broken pieces at the bottom, you still have to eat that, okay? Erasers, shoes, your pillow, whatever it is. Whatever is yours, use. And here's the second practice. Whatever you get, give. Whatever you get, give, because you don't need it. I know the majority of you. I've been to many of your homes. You don't need it. And by being proactive, whatever you get, give, this keeps materials in check. It keeps Bhagavan on top and the materials underneath. Okay? Ignorance, materialism. 2 asuras thus far. Oh.